I thought I'd seen everything after 15 years of hitting yard sales every weekend, but what I discovered at 1247 Maple Avenue in Ridgeway last October still keeps me awake at night. I should have driven past when I saw that everything, and I mean everything, was red. It was a cold Saturday morning, October 14th, 2023. The fog was so thick that my 2018 Honda CR-V's headlights barely cut through the mist as I navigated the winding suburban streets. I'd been hitting sales since 5:30 a.m., searching for vintage kitchenware and Depression-era glassware for my booth at Riverside Antique Mall. Business had been slow lately, and I needed inventory that would move quickly. That's when I saw the signs, bright red poster board with bold black lettering. Estate sale, everything must go 1247 Maple Avenue. What struck me immediately was how many signs there were. Usually, estate sales put up maybe 3 or 4 directional signs. This one had at least a dozen, creating an almost aggressive trail through the neighborhood. The house was a modest 2-story colonial, probably built in the mid-1970s with that distinctive brown brick and white trim combination. Nothing remarkable about the architecture, but what stopped me cold was the front yard. Every single item for sale was red. Not mostly red, not red-themed, completely, uniformly red. Red dishes arranged on card tables. Red clothing hanging from portable racks. Red furniture, chairs, lamps, side tables. Red electronics that should have been black or silver. Red books, red picture frames, red kitchen appliances. Even the cash box sitting on the main table was painted bright red. It was like someone had taken a normal estate sale and dipped everything in red paint. The woman running the sale was maybe 60 years old, thin, with graying brown hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a burgundy sweater despite the October weather being relatively mild, and her hands shook slightly as she arranged items on the tables. Her name tag, written in careful cursive, read, Helen. Quite a collection, I said, approaching the main table where she stood counting dollar bills. Everything's so coordinated. Helen looked up with tired, bloodshot eyes. My aunt was very particular about her decorating. She'd been collecting red items for over 40 years. Said it brought her good luck. Her voice carried a slight tremor, and she kept glancing back at the house as if expecting someone to appear in the doorway. I'd dealt with themed collections before. People who collected only blue and white china, or exclusively mid-century modern furniture. But this felt different. Every single item appeared to have been deliberately chosen or altered to match the color scheme. A toaster that should have been stainless steel was painted fire engine red. Books had their dust jackets removed and replaced with red paper covers. Even the houseplants were sitting in red ceramic pots with artificial red flowers glued onto the natural foliage. How long has she been collecting? I asked, picking up a red ceramic lamp shaped like a rose. The craftsmanship was beautiful, but something felt off about the paint job, too uniform, too perfect. Since 1983, Helen replied immediately, then seemed surprised by her own specificity. I mean, around then. She started after her husband passed away. Said she needed something to focus on. I wandered through the sale, examining items more closely. A red leather purse that looked expensive despite its age. A set of red-painted wooden picture frames containing photos of people I didn't recognize, families, couples, individual portraits. The faces looked happy, candid, like personal family photos rather than stock pictures. These are beautiful frames, I commented, lifting one that contained a photo of a young woman with dark hair, maybe in her 20s. Are the photos included? Helen rushed over quickly. Oh no, they're just for display. To show how the frames look with pictures in them. She took the frame from my hands with more force than necessary. The frames are $5 each, but the photos aren't part of the sale. Something in her manner made me more curious, not less. I'd been doing this long enough to recognize when someone was hiding something. The photos weren't random stock photos. They were clearly personal family pictures, the kind you'd find in someone's home. But whose family? At the far end of one table, I spotted an ornate wooden jewelry box. Unlike everything else, This one was painted in multiple shades of red, cherry red, burgundy, crimson, creating an almost somber effect. But underneath the paint, I could see hints of intricate carving. Someone had painted over what was probably a valuable antique piece. "How much for the jewelry box?" I asked. Helen's face went pale. $35. But maybe you'd prefer something else? That one's been in the family a very long time. It might have sentimental value. Her obvious reluctance made me more interested. I examined the box more closely. The wood underneath appeared to be mahogany, and the carving was incredibly detailed: leaves, flowers, and what looked like birds. This was serious craftsmanship, probably worth several $100s before someone had painted over it. "I'll take it," I said, pulling out my wallet. Helen stared at me for a long moment, then reluctantly held out her hand for the money. Her fingers were ice cold when they brushed mine. "Just be careful with it, okay? Some things are better left unopened." "What do you mean?" I asked, but she was already turning away, suddenly very busy reorganizing a table of red kitchen utensils. I loaded the jewelry box into my car and continued browsing. A red leather journal caught my eye, along with a red ceramic vase and a set of red-handled kitchen knives. Each item was reasonably priced, almost suspiciously so for pieces that appeared to be genuine antiques underneath their paint jobs. As I was paying for my final selections, another customer approached, an elderly man wearing a veteran's cap. "Excuse me," he said to Helen, "but that red briefcase over there. It looks exactly like one my nephew used to carry. He disappeared about 10 years ago, never found him. Even had the same initials scratched into the corner, MR. Helen went completely white. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Lots of briefcases look similar. Mind if I take a closer look?" The man persisted. "It's already sold," Helen said quickly. "Sorry. But I could see the briefcase clearly from where I stood. It had a small price tag on it, and no sold sticker." The old man saw it too. His expression darkened. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake. That briefcase." I said it's sold. Helen's voice rose to almost a shout. Several other customers turned to stare. Everything here belonged to my aunt. She collected these things legally. I have every right to sell them. The man backed away, clearly confused and upset. As he walked toward his car, I heard him muttering, "I know that was Mike's briefcase. I helped him pick it out for his new job." I left the sale with an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Something about Helen's reaction to the old man's questions felt wrong. And her comment about having every right to sell the item seemed oddly defensive. Back home, I carried my purchases into the garage where I do most of my restoration work. The jewelry box was my first priority. If it was as valuable as I suspected, I could make a decent profit once I removed the paint. Using mineral spirits and a soft cloth, I began carefully removing the red paint from one corner. Underneath was gorgeous mahogany with mother-of-pearl inlay work. This wasn't just valuable, it was museum-quality craftsmanship, probably dating back to the 1920s or 1930s. Someone had painted over a piece worth easily $1,000 or more. But as I worked, I noticed something disturbing. The lock mechanism had been damaged, not by normal wear but deliberately. Someone had forced it open with a screwdriver or chisel, leaving deep gouges in the wood around the keyhole. Then they'd painted over the damage to hide it. After 2 hours of careful work, I managed to get the lock open. Inside, the box was lined with red velvet, original, not painted. But tucked into a hidden compartment I found when the bottom felt loose, was a folded piece of paper and a small brass key. The paper was a handwritten note on lined notebook paper, dated 3 months earlier. "To whoever finds this, my name is Dorothy Brennan, and I live at 1247 Maple Avenue in Ridgeway. If you're reading this, it means Helen has finally held the estate sale I've been begging her not to have. I tried to destroy these things myself, but she wouldn't let me. She said they were too valuable, that we needed the money. She doesn't understand what they really are, or maybe she does and just doesn't care anymore. The red paint was my compromise. I thought if I made everything ugly, she'd finally agree to just throw it all away or donate it anonymously. I was wrong. She's determined to sell every piece, and I'm too sick to stop her. Every item in this house connects to someone who disappeared in our town over the past 40 years. I know this because I helped my brother acquire them. James Harrison owned Harrison's Curiosities on Commerce Street. He specialized in estate items, personal effects from people who were never coming back to claim them. I kept his records. I organized his inventory. I never asked the right questions because I didn't want to know the answers. The key opened storage unit 47 at Westfield Storage on Industrial Boulevard. James rented it in 1984, and I've been paying for it ever since he died. Inside, you'll find documentation for everything. Names, dates, photographs, police reports he collected. All the people these items belonged to before they became collectibles. If you have any conscience at all, you'll take this key to the police and give them the storage unit address. Tell them about Margaret Flynn, 1987. Tell them about David Chin, 1994. Tell them about the antique dealer who asked no questions and paid cash for personal effects that should never have been for sale. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I was young and stupid and I thought I was just helping my brother run a business. Tell them I tried to make it right by painting everything red. Red for the blood on our hands. Red so I'd never forget what we did. Red so maybe someday someone would realize what they were really buying. I'm dying now. Lung cancer. Helen thinks she's going to inherit a valuable collection. She has no idea she's inheriting evidence of dozens of crimes. Please. These families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. Dorothy Brennan. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the note. I read it 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood something. Then I grabbed my phone and Googled Margaret Flynn 1987 Ridgeway missing person. The first result was a cold case website. Margaret Flynn, age 23, disappeared on October 12, 1987, after telling friends she was going to spend the day visiting yard sales and antique shops in Ridgeway. Her car was found 3 days later in a parking lot downtown, but she was never seen again. The case remained open. I searched for David Chen. Same story. Age 34, disappeared in 1994 after visiting estate sales. Never found. I drove to Westfield Storage immediately, the brass key clutched in my sweaty palm. The facility was older, probably built in the 1980s, with rows of beige metal storage units. Unit 47 was in the back corner, away from the main office and security cameras. The key worked perfectly. Inside, I found a horror show of organization. Dozens of cardboard boxes, each labeled with a year and carefully catalogued. Inside each box were files containing personal items, photographs, and documentation. All organized by year, going back to 1983. The first box I opened was labeled 1987. Inside were multiple files, each with a name and date. Margaret Flynn's file contained photographs of her jewelry, her purse, her driver's license, even her house keys. At the bottom was a Polaroid of a red jewelry box, the same one I just bought. I found David Chen's file in the 1994 box. Photos of his briefcase, his wallet, his wedding ring. The briefcase in the photos was identical to the one I'd seen at the sale. Same scratched initials, same worn leather, same distinctive brass clasps. Every file contained the same type of documentation, personal effects, identity documents, and newspaper clippings about the disappearances. Many also contained handwritten receipts signed J. Harrison, Harrison's Curiosities, 234 Commerce Street. Each receipt documented the purchase of personal items from estate liquidation. But the dates on the receipts were always within days of when the disappearances were first reported. At the bottom of one box, I found a composition notebook filled with Dorothy's handwriting. It was a detailed record of her brother's business practices, written in the careful script of someone trying to create a confession. James never told me where the items came from. He said he had contacts who alerted him when someone died without family, when estates needed to be liquidated quickly. He paid cash, No questions asked? It wasn't until 1995 that I realized the truth. A woman came into the shop looking for her missing daughter's jewelry. She recognized the necklace in our display case. When I checked our records, the necklace had been purchased just 3 days after the daughter was reported missing. That's when I understood what kind of estate liquidation we were really dealing with. I confronted James, but he said it was too late to back out. He said the people who brought him items weren't the kind you said no to. He said as long as we didn't ask questions, we were just running a legitimate business. But I knew better. I started keeping better records, photographing everything, hoping someday I could make it right. When James died in 2003, I inherited everything. The shop, the inventory, and the knowledge of what it all really was. I tried to go to the police, but I was scared. I was an accessory to dozens of crimes. Instead, I decided to paint everything red and stop selling it. I thought if I made it all ugly and disturbing, eventually I'd find the courage to destroy it. But Helen needs money. Her husband left her with debts, and she sees this collection as her inheritance. She doesn't understand that every red item represents someone's murdered loved one. She thinks I'm just a crazy old woman who painted valuable antiques. I'm leaving this record for whoever finds it. The red paint was supposed to be a warning: blood money, evidence of violence, items that should never be sold. But I failed. I was too much of a coward to do the right thing while I was healthy enough to face the consequences. If you're reading this, please finish what I couldn't. Give these families their answers. I called 911 from the storage unit. Detective Martinez arrived within 30 minutes, along with 2 other officers and a crime scene photographer. As I explained what I'd found, more units kept arriving. By evening, the storage facility looked like something from a TV crime show. Dorothy Brennan died 6 weeks ago. Detective Martinez told me as we watched officers carefully cataloging evidence. Lung cancer, just like she said in the note. We never had any idea she was connected to the Harrison case. There was a Harrison case. Harrison's Curiosities was investigated in the mid-1990s for dealing in stolen goods, but we never had enough evidence to make charges stick. James Harrison claimed he only bought from legitimate estate sales and private sellers. Without proof of where the items really came from, we couldn't build a case. After he died, the investigation went cold. Detective Martinez flipped through Dorothy's notebook. This documentation is going to help us solve cases that have been cold for decades. Look at this organization. She kept records of everything. Names, dates, original police reports she somehow obtained, even photographs of the items before they were painted red. Helen was arrested the next morning. When police searched her house, they found additional evidence Dorothy had hidden throughout the building: more photographs, more receipts, more documentation. Helen claimed she'd known nothing about her aunt's past, but investigators found internet searches on her computer about the value of antique jewelry and vintage personal effects. She knew enough to be suspicious. Detective Martinez explained to me later. The red paint, her aunt's obvious distress about selling the items, the fact that Dorothy had specifically asked her never to hold an estate sale. But she needed money and chose to ignore the warning signs. The investigation ultimately connected evidence to 23 missing person cases dating back to 1983. James Harrison had been the middleman in a network that included at least 3 different killers who brought him their victims' personal effects to be sold. He'd laundered stolen property from murder victims for over 20 years. Most of the victims had been people who frequented yard sales, estate sales, and antique shops, people who carried cash and jewelry, who often shopped alone, who followed predictable patterns that made them easy targets. The killers would take the valuable items and sell them to Harrison, who would hold on to them for a few months before putting them in his shop. Dorothy's red paint system had actually been brilliant. Every painted item was connected to a victim. The unpainted items in her house were legitimate purchases or family heirlooms. She'd been creating a visual catalog of evidence while trying to make the stolen items too ugly to sell. The families got their answers, even if they couldn't get their loved ones back. Margaret Flynn's parents, both in their 80s, finally learned what happened to their daughter. David Chen's widow discovered why his briefcase had been at that estate's sale. 23 families finally got closure on cases that had haunted them for decades. The case made national news. Estate sale uncovers evidence in decades-old missing person cases. The story of Dorothy's red paint confession inspired other people to come forward with suspicious items they'd bought at estate sales and antique shops. 3 additional cases were solved when buyers brought in items that matched missing person reports. I testified at Helen's trial. She was convicted of trafficking in stolen property and accessory after the fact to multiple murders. She received 15 years in prison. During her sentencing, she finally admitted she'd suspected something was wrong but had chosen to ignore it because she needed the money from the sale. The jewelry box, the journal, the ceramic vase, and the kitchen knives I'd bought were all entered as evidence. I never saw them again, but I didn't want them back. Some bargains come with too high a price. I still hit yard sales every weekend, but everything looks different now. I pay attention to sellers who seem nervous or evasive. I notice when items don't match someone's apparent lifestyle or economic situation. I look for collections that seem too themed, too perfect, too carefully curated. And I always wonder about the stories behind the things I buy. Because sometimes the best deals at yard sales aren't bargains at all. They're evidence of tragedies that someone hoped would never be discovered. The red paint was Dorothy's way of marking blood money, making sure every piece connected to a victim would be literally painted the color of guilt. Helen saw valuable antiques that needed to be sold. I saw interesting pieces that needed restoration. None of us understood we were looking at a 40-year confession painted in crimson. Have you ever bought something at a yard sale that gave you an uncomfortable feeling? What's the strangest themed collection you've ever encountered? Sometimes the stories behind our second-hand treasures are darker than we want to know, and sometimes those stories need to be told, no matter how long they've been buried under layers of red paint. I've been working as a detective with Clearwater Police Department for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen every scam in the book. But what happened on Birch Lane last September still makes me question how well we really know our neighbors. It started with a complaint call on September 23, 2023. Mrs. Patricia Chin at 892 Birch Lane reported that someone was holding an unauthorized yard sale in front of her house. When I arrived in my 2020 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor around 10:15 a.m., I found exactly what she described. Tables full of household items set up on the street in front of her property, complete with price tags and a cash box. The problem was, Mrs. Chin wasn't running the sale. A man in his 40s, average height with thinning brown hair, was standing behind the main table counting money. He wore a faded blue polo shirt and khaki pants, looking like any suburban dad on a Saturday morning. When I approached, he seemed completely relaxed, even friendly. "Good morning, officer," he said with a smile. "Beautiful day for a sale, isn't it? Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. I understand you're holding a yard sale here?" "That's right. Marcus Williams." He handed me his driver's license without hesitation. The address was 1247 Oak Street, about 2 miles away. "Just trying to clear out some clutter, you know how it is." I looked around at the merchandise. Standard yard sale fare, kitchen appliances, books, clothing, small furniture. Everything looked clean and well organized. Prices were reasonable. Several neighbors were browsing through items, chatting casually with Williams like they'd known him for years. "Mr. Williams, this isn't your property." The homeowner called to complain. His expression shifted to confusion. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding. I have permission to be here." He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message conversation. "See? The homeowner said I could use their front yard for my sale." I examined the phone screen. The messages appeared to be between Williams and someone named Patsy, who had agreed to let him use their yard space in exchange for helping with some household repairs. The conversation looked legitimate, casual, friendly, with specific details about timing and setup. Mrs. Chin emerged from her house, clearly agitated. She was in her 70s, wearing a floral housecoat and slippers. Officer, I told you, I never gave anyone permission for this. I don't even know this man. Williams looked genuinely surprised. Ma'am, we texted about this last week. You said your husband needed help fixing the back porch, and I could use your yard for my sale in exchange for the labor. My husband has been dead for 3 years, Mrs. Chen said coldly. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I separated the two parties and began investigating more carefully. Williams maintained his story. He'd been contacted by Pat Chen via Facebook Marketplace about a mutual arrangement. Pat needed handyman work, Marcus needed space for a yard sale. They'd exchanged phone numbers and worked out the details. The phone number Williams had been texting wasn't Mrs. Chen's. When I called it, the number was disconnected. Sir, I'm going to need you to pack up these items and move along. You don't have permission to be here. But I do have permission, Williams insisted, showing me the text messages again. Look, Pat even sent me photos of the yard to confirm the space would work for my tables. The photos on his phone did show Mrs. Chen's front yard, recent pictures taken from multiple angles. Someone had definitely cased her property, and used those images to convince Williams the arrangement was legitimate. As Williams began reluctantly packing up his merchandise, I noticed something odd. Mrs. Chen was staring at specific items with a strange expression, not anger, but recognition. Officer, she said quietly, that red ceramic lamp. I had one exactly like it. It disappeared from my garden shed about 2 months ago. I examined the lamp more closely. It was distinctive, handmade, with a unique glaze pattern. Mr. Williams, where did you acquire this lamp? It was my grandmother's. Had it for years. Mrs. Chen shook her head. That lamp has a chip on the base shaped like a crescent moon. My late husband dropped it in 1987, but I kept it anyway because it was a wedding gift. She was right. The chip was there, exactly as she'd described. I detained Williams and called for backup. Over the next hour, Mrs. Chen identified 6 more items from the yard sale as belongings that had gone missing from her property over the past several months. A garden trowel, a set of kitchen towels, a ceramic planter, a decorative birdhouse, and 2 books. I thought I was just misplacing things, she explained. Getting older, you know. I figured I'd put them somewhere and forgotten. I never thought someone was stealing them. Williams maintained his innocence, claiming he'd bought all the items at other estate sales and flea markets over the past year. But when we searched his van, a white 2017 Ford Transit, we found tools for bypassing simple locks, a collection of house keys on unmarked rings, and a notebook containing addresses and schedules for dozens of elderly residents in the area. The notebook was the smoking gun. Each entry contained detailed information about homeowners, names, ages, daily routines, and notes about their living situations. Lives alone, walks dog every morning 8 a.m., grocery shopping Tuesdays, daughter visits Sundays only. Mrs. Chen's entry read, Patricia Chen, 74, widow, 892 Birch Lane. Dog walker 7:30 a.m. daily. Grocery shopping Thursdays 10 a.m. Back porch needs repair. Garden shed lock broken since July. How did you get this information? I asked Williams. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. I'm in the handyman business. I keep notes about potential customers, properties that might need work. It's just good business practice. But the notebook contained far more than business information. It included details about security systems, spare key locations, and valuable items visible through windows. Williams had been conducting surveillance on elderly homeowners throughout Clearwater for months. Detective Sarah Henderson arrived to assist with the investigation. She recognized Williams immediately. Marcus Williams, a.k.a. Mark Wilson, a.k.a. Michael Warner. We've had reports about him in 3 other counties. Same M.O., targets elderly homeowners, steals small items over time, then holds yard sales to sell the stolen goods. This scheme was sophisticated. Williams would identify elderly people living alone, often through social media, public records, or simply by observing neighborhoods. He'd study their routines, gain access to their properties when they were away, and steal small items that might not be immediately missed: garden tools, kitchen items, books, decorative objects. Then he'd hold yard sales in different neighborhoods, often using public spaces or getting permission from unsuspecting property owners through fake social media profiles. The items were sold quickly, for cash, to strangers who had no idea they were buying stolen goods. The genius of it, Detective Henderson explained, is that most victims don't report the thefts because they think they've just misplaced the items. Elderly people often doubt their own memory when small things go missing. By the time they realize items were stolen, the merchandise has been sold and scattered across the county. Williams had been running this scam for over 2 years. The fake text conversation with Patsy had been created using a spoofing app that made it appear he was texting with Mrs. Chin, when actually he was sending messages to himself from a fake number he controlled. We executed a search warrant on his Oak Street address. His garage was set up like a warehouse, shelves organized by neighborhood, labeled boxes containing stolen items sorted by planned sale dates, and a computer system tracking which items had been stolen from which houses. Over 200 elderly residents had been victimized. Williams kept detailed records of everything: what he'd stolen, when he'd stolen it, and how much he'd sold it for. His total profit over 2 years was nearly $47,000. The most disturbing discovery was his future target list. Williams had identified over 100 additional elderly homeowners he planned to victimize, complete with surveillance photos, routine schedules, and property assessments. Mrs. Chin got her items back, along with several others she hadn't realized were missing. But many victims never recovered their stolen belongings because Williams had already sold them at previous yard sales throughout the region. Williams was charged with burglary, theft, organized retail crime, and elder abuse. He pled guilty and received 8 years in state prison. The judge noted that his systematic targeting of vulnerable elderly victims warranted the maximum sentence under the elder abuse statute. The case led to changes in how we handle reports of missing items from elderly residents. We now take these reports more seriously and look for patterns that might indicate systematic theft rather than simple misplacement. I testified at Williams' sentencing hearing. During his statement to the court, he showed no remorse for the thefts themselves, only for getting caught. These people had more stuff than they needed anyway, he said. I was just redistributing resources. The judge's response was swift. Mr. Williams, you violated the homes and peace of mind of over 200 elderly citizens. You turned their own neighborhoods into hunting grounds. This court sentences you to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation with restitution to all victims. But the real impact went beyond the stolen items. Many of Williams' victims reported feeling unsafe in their own homes after learning they'd been targeted. Several moved to assisted living facilities earlier than planned because they no longer felt secure living alone. Mrs. Chen installed a security system and changed all her locks, but she told me months later that she still checked and rechecked her belongings obsessively. It's not about the lamp or the garden tools, she explained. It's knowing that someone was watching me, studying my habits, treating my home like their personal shopping center. The case made me realize how vulnerable our elderly neighbors really are, and how criminals exploit their trust and their tendency to doubt themselves when things go missing. Williams wasn't just stealing objects, he was stealing peace of mind from people who deserve to feel safe in their own homes. Now when I see yard sales in my patrol area, I pay closer attention. I look for sales that don't match the neighborhood, sellers who seem nervous about police presence, and merchandise that appears too varied or valuable for typical household cleanout sales. Because sometimes the friendly neighbor holding a yard sale isn't a neighbor at all. They're a predator who's been watching, waiting, and stealing from the very community they're pretending to serve. Have you ever noticed yard sales in your neighborhood that seemed out of place? Do you keep track of small household items that go missing, or do you assume you've just misplaced them? Sometimes the difference between losing something and having it stolen is just a matter of paying attention to the patterns around us. Working as a patrol officer in Oakwood for 8 years, I've responded to plenty of neighbor disputes. But nothing prepared me for what I found at 634 Sycamore Drive on November 11, 2023. What started as a simple noise complaint turned into one of the most disturbing cases of stalking and psychological harassment I've ever encountered. The call came in around 2:30 p.m. on a cold, overcast Saturday. Mrs. Janet Morrison at 632 Sycamore Drive reported loud music and shouting coming from her neighbor's yard sale. "She's got speakers blasting, and she keeps yelling at people through a megaphone," Mrs. Morrison explained over the phone. "It's been going on for 3 hours, and she won't stop when we ask her to turn it down." I drove my 2021 Chevrolet Tahoe patrol unit through the established neighborhood of modest ranch homes and mature oak trees. Sycamore Drive was typically quiet on weekend afternoons, but I could hear the disturbance 2 blocks away. Classical music mixed with what sounded like auction-style announcements echoing through the residential area. When I arrived at 634 Sycamore Drive, I found a scene that made me immediately radio for backup. The front yard was set up like an outdoor art gallery, with dozens of easels displaying paintings under white canopy tents. A woman in her 50s with wild gray hair and paint-stained clothing was standing behind a podium with a portable microphone, gesturing dramatically at the artwork. "Ladies and gentlemen of Sycamore Drive," she was announcing in a theatrical voice, "you have been living as my subjects for 2 years, and now it's time to claim your portraits. Each painting captures your true essence, your daily rituals, your most private moments." The paintings were disturbing. They showed neighbors engaged in ordinary activities, gardening, checking mail, walking dogs, sitting on porches, but painted in an unsettling style that made everyday actions look sinister or voyeuristic. Every face was rendered in meticulous detail, clearly painted from direct observation. About 15 neighbors had gathered in the yard, but instead of browsing casually like typical yard sale customers, they looked shocked and uncomfortable. Several people were holding paintings of themselves, looking confused and upset. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez with Oakwood Police," I announced as I approached the woman with the microphone. "I need you to turn down the music and speak with me." She turned toward me with an intense stare, her eyes bright with what looked like manic excitement. "Officer! Perfect timing! You're just in time for the bidding on Mrs. Morrison's bathroom series." I looked toward the easel she was pointing at. 3 large canvases showed detailed paintings of a woman, clearly Mrs. Morrison based on the facial features, through what appeared to be a bathroom window. The paintings showed her in various states of undress, brushing her teeth, applying makeup, and stepping out of a shower. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification, and I need you to explain exactly what's happening here." "Certainly. I'm Elena Vasquez, resident artist of Sycamore Drive." She handed me her driver's license while continuing to hold the microphone. "I've been documenting the authentic lives of my neighbors through observational portraiture. Today is the grand unveiling and sale." Mrs. Morrison pushed through the crowd, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Officer, she painted me naked. She's been spying on me in my own bathroom." I examined the bathroom paintings more closely. The level of detail was impossible to achieve without prolonged observation from a specific vantage point. These weren't artistic interpretations. They were realistic documentations of private moments. "Ms. Vasquez, how did you obtain the reference material for these paintings?" Elena's expression remained enthusiastic. "Direct observation, of course. True art requires authentic subjects in their natural habitats. I've spent countless hours studying the daily patterns of my neighbors. Each painting represents weeks of careful documentation." "From where did you observe these subjects?" "Various locations. The oak tree in my backyard provides excellent sight lines into several bathroom windows. The second-floor window of my studio overlooks most of the neighborhood's private yards. I also discovered that the drainage ditch behind Elm Street offers perfect views into several homes during evening hours when people don't close their curtains." The crowd of neighbors was growing more agitated as they processed what Elena was admitting. A man in his 60s stepped forward, holding a painting that showed him in his bedroom, apparently getting dressed for work. "Officer, I'm Tom Bradley from 628 Sycamore. This woman has been stalking all of us. Look at this painting. She captured the exact pattern of my morning routine, including details about my work clothes and the alarm clock on my nightstand. She had to be watching me for months to get this level of detail. Elena nodded proudly. Mr. Bradley leaves for work every morning at exactly 7:23 a.m. He always puts on his left sock first, checks his phone twice while getting dressed, and keeps his car keys on the dresser next to his wedding photo. Beautiful consistency of habit, very inspiring for an artist. Ma'am, you're describing surveillance behavior. How long have you been watching your neighbors? 2 years of dedicated observation. I moved to Sycamore Drive specifically because the neighborhood layout provided excellent sight lines for my artistic project. The previous owners of my house had already removed several trees that were blocking views into neighboring properties, almost like it was meant to be. Detective William Foster arrived as my backup, and I filled him in on the situation. Elena continued her announcements while we talked, apparently oblivious to the legal implications of what she was describing. Today only, neighbors can purchase their personal portraits for the special resident price of $200 each. This is substantially below my usual gallery prices. Consider it a neighborhood discount for your invaluable contributions to my artistic vision. Detective Foster began interviewing neighbors while I tried to get Elena to turn off her sound system. The stories were consistent and disturbing. Elena had been systematically documenting their private lives for at least 2 years, painting detailed portraits of them in their homes, yards, and even bedrooms and bathrooms. Mrs. Carol Hughes from 630 Sycamore was holding a painting that showed her reading in bed, wearing her nightgown, with her medication bottles clearly visible on the nightstand. She painted the labels on my prescription bottles, Mrs. Hughes said, her voice shaking. She knows what medical conditions I have, what medications I take, when I take them. How is that legal? Elena overheard and approached with her microphone. Mrs. Hughes, I'm so glad you appreciate the attention to detail. Your evening reading ritual is beautifully meditative. I particularly enjoy documenting how you adjust your pillows exactly 3 times before settling in with your book. You've been watching me in my bedroom? Art requires dedication. I position myself in the oak tree outside your window most evenings between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. for approximately 14 months. Your consistency was remarkable. Same book position, same lighting, same ritual. Very photogenic subject matter. Detective Foster and I exchanged looks. This was criminal surveillance, not artistic observation. We began examining more paintings while Elena continued her sales pitch. A family portrait showed the Jenkins family from 636 Sycamore having dinner, but the painting revealed details only visible from inside their home, the contents of their plates, conversation apparently captured in their facial expressions, even their children's homework visible on a kitchen counter. Ms. Vasquez, how did you paint interior details of your neighbors' homes? Oh, that required more creative positioning. Several houses have windows that don't quite close properly, or sliding doors with gaps. During summer months when people leave windows open, you can observe quite a lot from the right exterior positions. I also discovered that many residents don't use their curtains effectively. Mrs. Jenkins looked horrified. You've been looking through our windows while we eat dinner? While our children do homework? Your family dynamics are fascinating. Little Sarah always argues about eating her vegetables, and your husband consistently checks his phone during meals. Very authentic suburban family behavior. Perfect subject matter. Detective Foster had heard enough. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for stalking and invasion of privacy. You have the right to remain silent. Elena seemed genuinely confused by the arrest. But I'm an artist. This is my neighborhood documentary project. I thought everyone would be honored to have professional portraits of their authentic daily lives. Ms. Vasquez, watching people in their homes without permission is illegal surveillance, not art. But I live here too. Isn't it natural for neighbors to observe each other? As Detective Foster placed Elena in handcuffs, neighbors began examining the full scope of her artistic project. She had painted over 60 portraits of various residents, including multiple paintings of some individuals that tracked their routines across different seasons and times of day. The most disturbing discovery was her bedroom series. Paintings that could only have been created by someone positioned outside bedroom windows during private moments. Several paintings showed couples in intimate but non-sexual situations, getting dressed, having conversations, comforting sick children, all rendered with the precision of someone who had observed these moments multiple times. We executed a search warrant on Elena's house that evening. Her home studio contained hundreds of sketches, photographs taken with telephoto lenses, and detailed written observations about her neighbors' routines. She had maps of the neighborhood with optimal observation points marked, schedules documenting when residents were most likely to be engaged in interesting activities, and equipment for long-range surveillance. The written logs were the most disturbing evidence. Elena had documented intimate details about her neighbors' lives, medical conditions apparent from prescription bottles, relationship conflicts overheard through windows, financial information gleaned from mail and packages, and personal habits observed during private moments. Her journal entries read like a stalker's manifesto. Mrs. Morrison's bathroom ritual is my masterpiece. The morning light at 6:45 a.m. creates perfect shadows across her shoulders. I've documented her routine for 18 months, she never varies her pattern. True dedication to consistency. Another entry. The Bradley family fights every Sunday after church. Always in the kitchen. The children hide in their rooms while the parents argue about money. Beautiful emotional authenticity, much better than posed portraits. Elena had been using binoculars, telephoto camera lenses, and strategic positioning in trees, drainage areas, and other concealed locations to conduct surveillance on virtually every resident of Sycamore Drive. She'd created detailed dossiers on their routines, relationships, and personal habits. Neighbors reported feeling violated and unsafe after learning the extent of Elena's surveillance. Many realized that unexplained feelings of being watched, or small changes in their yard that they'd attributed to animals or wind, had actually been evidence of Elena's observation activities. I installed motion sensor lights last year because I kept feeling like someone was in my backyard, Mrs. Hughes explained. Now I know it wasn't paranoia, she really was out there watching me. Elena was charged with multiple counts of stalking, invasion of privacy, and criminal surveillance. Because she had systematically targeted numerous victims over an extended period, prosecutors were able to charge her under the state's organized harassment statute, which carried enhanced penalties. During her psychological evaluation, Elena maintained that her behavior was legitimate artistic practice. She showed no understanding of why her neighbors felt violated, insisting that observing people in their natural environments was standard documentary methodology. Great artists have always studied their subjects intimately, she told the court-appointed psychologist. How can you paint someone's true essence without understanding their private moments? These people were living their lives right there for anyone to see. I just happened to be paying attention. The case went to trial 4 months later. Elena's defense attorney argued that she was an eccentric artist who hadn't intended to harm anyone, but the prosecution presented evidence of systematic stalking behavior that went far beyond artistic observation. Neighbors testified about the psychological impact of learning they'd been under surveillance in their own homes. Several families reported installing security systems, changing their daily routines, and feeling unsafe in spaces where they previously felt completely private. Elena was convicted on 12 counts of stalking and sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation with a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 yards of Sycamore Drive. She was also required to undergo psychological counseling and register as a stalking offender. The paintings were ordered destroyed as evidence of criminal activity, despite Elena's protests that they represented 2 years of artistic work. The judge ruled that the paintings were products of illegal surveillance, and keeping them would perpetuate the violation of the victim's privacy. 6 months after Elena's conviction, several neighbors moved away from Sycamore Drive. They reported that they could never feel completely private in their homes again, knowing how thoroughly Elena had documented their personal lives. Mrs. Morrison had her bathroom completely renovated, installing frosted windows and additional privacy measures. I can't take a shower without wondering if someone is watching, she told me during a follow-up interview. She stole my feeling of safety in my own home. The case changed how I respond to reports of neighbors feeling watched or surveilled. What might seem like harmless eccentricity or artistic interest can actually be criminal stalking behavior that severely impacts victims' sense of security and privacy. Elena's yard sale represented the culmination of 2 years of systematic stalking. She was literally trying to profit from her victims' violated privacy by selling them evidence of their own surveillance. The fact that she expected her neighbors to pay for paintings created through illegal observation showed complete disconnection from the reality of her criminal behavior. I drive through Sickaville Drive regularly now, and the neighborhood feels different. Several houses have new security systems, many windows that used to be open are now consistently closed, and the friendly atmosphere that once characterized the area has been replaced by a more guarded, suspicious dynamic. The case made me realize how much we take privacy for granted in our own homes, and how devastating it can be when that privacy is systematically violated by someone who claims to be creating art. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? Do you think your neighbors pay attention to your daily routines? Sometimes the difference between friendly community interest and criminal stalking is just a matter of boundaries, and some people don't understand where those boundaries are until it's too late. I've been a paramedic with Hillcrest Emergency Services for 14 years, but the call to Magnolia Court on December 2, 2023, still haunts me. What we discovered that cold winter morning wasn't just a medical emergency, it was the unraveling of 40 years of carefully hidden secrets. The initial call came in around 7:45 a.m. as a welfare check. Mrs. Ruth Hendricks at 421 Magnolia Court hadn't been seen by neighbors for 3 days, which was unusual since she typically maintained a rigid daily schedule. Her next-door neighbor, David Martinez, had called 911 after noticing newspapers piling up and finding signs posted around the neighborhood advertising a yard sale at Ruth's address. "That's what made me worried," Martinez explained when I arrived in our 2019 Ford F-550 ambulance. "Ruth has lived here for 40 years, and she's never had a yard sale. Never. She doesn't even let people in her house for repairs." Seeing those signs everywhere got me thinking something was seriously wrong. The house at 421 Magnolia Court was a modest split-level built in the early 1980s, painted beige with dark brown trim. The yard was meticulously maintained, but the windows were covered with heavy curtains that never seemed to open. In 14 years of responding to calls in this neighborhood, I'd never been inside Ruth's house. My partner, EMT Lisa Thompson, and I knocked on the front door while Martinez waited by our ambulance. No response. The yard sale signs were professionally made, not handwritten like most neighborhood sales, and they advertised everything from furniture to collectibles to rare vintage items. The sale was scheduled to start at 8 a.m., less than 15 minutes away. "Ma'am, this is Hillcrest Emergency Services," I called through the door. "We're here to check on your welfare. Can you respond if you're able?" Silence. Martinez provided us with Ruth's basic information as we prepared to make entry. Ruth Hendricks, age 67, lived alone, no known family in the area. She'd been a librarian at the county library until retiring 10 years earlier. Neighbors described her as polite but extremely private. She would wave from her windows but rarely engaged in conversation. "She gets groceries delivered," Martinez explained. "Same delivery truck every Tuesday morning. I've offered to help with yard work or snow removal over the years, but she always says she's fine and doesn't need anything. Very independent woman." I used the lock-picking tools from our medical kit to gain entry through the front door. The smell hit us immediately, not decomposition, but something else. Old food, stale air, and an underlying chemical odor I couldn't identify. The interior of the house was shocking. Every surface was covered with items arranged in careful displays: furniture, clothing, books, electronics, jewelry, art pieces. It looked like a warehouse rather than a home. Narrow pathways had been carved between towering stacks of merchandise, all organized by category and marked with price tags. "Ruth?" I called out as Lisa and I made our way carefully through the maze of items. "This is the paramedics," Are you in the house? We found her in what had once been the living room, sitting in an antique rocking chair surrounded by towers of books and picture frames. Ruth was conscious but appeared confused and dehydrated. She was wearing a faded blue housecoat and slippers, and her gray hair looked like it hadn't been combed in days. Ma'am, I'm Kevin Patterson, paramedic with Hillcrest Emergency. Can you tell me your name? Ruth Hendricks. She responded clearly, though her voice was weak. I live at 421 Magnolia Court. Ruth, your neighbor was worried about you. When did you last eat or drink something? She looked around at the items surrounding her chair as if trying to remember where she was. I've been getting ready for the sale. 40 years of collecting. It's time to let it all go. Lisa began taking Ruth's vital signs while I assessed the living situation. The house was filled floor to ceiling with items, but everything was clean and organized. This wasn't hoarding in the traditional sense. It was more like a carefully curated warehouse. Ruth, have you been eating regularly? Drinking water? I couldn't get to the kitchen, she admitted. Too many boxes in the way. I've been preparing for 3 weeks, moving everything into position for the sale. I think I forgot to eat yesterday. Maybe the day before. As Lisa prepared for dehydration, I continued examining the house. Every room was packed with merchandise, but the items seemed unusual for typical household accumulation. There were multiple sets of china in different patterns, dozens of men's watches, women's jewelry organized in display cases, and rows of clothing that appeared to be different sizes and styles. In what had been the dining room, I found something that made me radio for police backup, a card table covered with identification documents. Driver's licenses, social security cards, birth certificates, all belonging to different people. Some of the IDs were decades old, with photos showing people of various ages. Ruth, can you explain these identification documents? She followed my gaze to the table and sighed deeply. Those go with the personal items. I always kept them together. People's belongings should stay with their identification, don't you think? Where did these items come from, Ruth? The library, she said simply. 40 years at the county library. People leave things behind. Books, purses, wallets, briefcases. We're supposed to hold them for 30 days, then dispose of them if they're not claimed. Lisa and I exchanged concerned looks. The policy at most libraries was to turn unclaimed valuables over to police, not keep them for personal use. Ruth, did you take these items from the library's lost and found? Not took, she corrected. Rescued. Do you know how many valuable things people just abandon? Beautiful jewelry, family photos, personal treasures. After 30 days, the library throws them away or donates them. Such a waste. Police officer Jennifer Walsh arrived as we were preparing to transport Ruth to the hospital for dehydration and psychiatric evaluation. I briefed her on what we'd found, and she began documenting the scene while Lisa and I got Ruth stabilized. The scope of Ruth's collection became clear as Officer Walsh and Detective Anthony Davis conducted their investigation. Ruth had been systematically taking items from the library's lost and found for 4 decades, building an enormous inventory of personal belongings that people had never reclaimed. The crazy part, Detective Davis explained to me later, is that she kept meticulous records. Every item is catalogued with the date it was left at the library, where it was found, and any identifying information from associated materials. Ruth's filing system was incredibly detailed. She had documented thousands of items, from expensive jewelry and electronics to mundane personal effects like reading glasses and umbrellas. Each entry included notes about the probable owner, attempts made to identify them, and the date they became available for rescue. During her psychiatric evaluation at Regional Medical Center, Ruth explained her rationale to Dr. Patricia Kim, the attending psychiatrist. People are so careless with their belongings. They leave purses in the reference section, wallets in the computer lab, jewelry in the restrooms. After 30 days, the library considers them abandoned. I couldn't bear to see precious things thrown away, so I started taking them home for safekeeping. Ruth's intention had been to preserve items until their rightful owners could be found, but over 4 decades, her safekeeping had evolved into hoarding. She'd convinced herself that she was protecting valuable items from disposal, when actually she was preventing their return to owners or their families. The investigation revealed that Ruth had taken items worth an estimated $200,000 over her 40-year career. While many items were genuinely abandoned personal effects, some represented significant losses to their owners. Wedding rings, family heirlooms, important documents, and irreplaceable photographs had been sitting in Ruth's house for decades. "What's heartbreaking," Detective Davis told me, "is that Ruth genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. She wasn't selling the items or using them for personal gain. She was preserving them. But she was also preventing them from being returned through proper channels." The yard sale signs had been Ruth's attempt to finally return the items to circulation. After her retirement, she'd become increasingly overwhelmed by the volume of objects in her house and had decided to hold a massive sale to find new homes for everything she'd been protecting. Ruth's medical evaluation revealed early-stage dementia, which explained her recent confusion and inability to care for herself properly. The stress of preparing for the yard sale, combined with not eating or drinking adequately, had triggered the dehydration episode that led to the welfare check. Over the following weeks, police worked with library staff to identify owners or families of the collected items. Many of the identification documents helped reconnect belongings with people who had given up hope of ever seeing them again. Margaret Foster, now 58, had lost her wedding ring in the library bathroom in 1987. "I was pregnant with my first child and my fingers were swollen," she explained. "I took off my ring to wash my hands and forgot it. I called the library every day for weeks, but they said it was never turned in." The ring had been in Ruth's jewelry collection for 36 years, carefully preserved in its original condition. James O'Connor received a call about his father's wallet, which had been lost at the library in 1995. Dad had Alzheimer's and would wander sometimes. He disappeared from the library one day, and we found him 6 blocks away, but his wallet was missing. We thought someone had stolen it. The wallet contained family photos and important documents that James thought were gone forever. Ruth was not charged with theft due to her age, mental condition, and the fact that she had followed what she believed were library policies. The items had been officially classified as abandoned according to library procedures, even though proper disposal protocols hadn't been followed. However, the case led to significant changes at the county library system. New policies required unclaimed valuables to be turned over to police after 30 days, and multiple staff members were required to witness the disposal of lost items to prevent similar situations. Ruth was moved to an assisted living facility where she could receive proper care for her dementia. Her house was cleared and prepared for sale, with proceeds going toward her care and restitution to people who had lost valuable items. I visited Ruth several times at her new facility. She remained confused about why people were upset about her rescue efforts, but she seemed relieved to no longer be surrounded by towers of other people's belongings. I just wanted to take care of things until their owners came back, she told me during one visit. But I guess I waited too long. Maybe I should have just let the library throw them away. The case made me think about the difference between helping and hoarding, between preservation and possession. Ruth had spent 40 years thinking she was protecting lost treasures, but actually she was preventing closure for people who had given up hope of recovering their belongings. The yard sale that never happened would have been one of the largest in the county's history, 40 years' worth of lost items finally returning to circulation. But instead of a sale, it became a reunion project, reconnecting people with belongings they thought were gone forever. Mrs. Foster wore her recovered wedding ring to our follow-up interview. "It still fits perfectly," she said, tears in her eyes. "I told my children about it so many times over the years. They thought it was just another story about something Mom had lost. Now they can see it was real." The case reminded me that sometimes the most well-intentioned actions can cause unintended harm, and that the difference between helping and hoarding often comes down to knowing when to let go. Have you ever lost something valuable and wondered what happened to it? Do you think holding on to lost items is preservation or possession? Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for lost belongings is to let them find their way back home, even if it means accepting that we can't protect everything we think is worth saving. The yard sale signs around Magnolia Court were taken down by police, but neighbors still talk about the woman who spent 40 years collecting their lost treasures, waiting for a day that never came to give them all back. The True Yard Sale Horror Story series reveals how seemingly innocent community activities can hide disturbing secrets about the people around us. From blood money painted red to surveillance disguised as art, these connected cases remind us that the most dangerous predators often hide in plain sight, using familiar community activities to mask their true intentions. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.